The back door was standing open. At first, it didn't seem important. Then I realized something was wrong. There should have been music playing from Carol's little kitchen radio. There should have been the smell of sweet tea or fresh bread drifting through the house. Instead, there was silence. The kind of silence that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up before your mind has figured out why. 3 days earlier, I had left for a fishing trip at Lake Cumberland with 3 friends I'd known since high school. Carol had kissed me goodbye on the front porch, smiled, and reminded me not to forget my blood pressure medication. I promised I'd be home Sunday afternoon. Neither of us imagined that promise would become the only reason she survived. My name is Raymond Mercer. I'm 63 years old. For more than 40 years, I owned a residential construction company in Nashville, Tennessee. I spent my career calculating load limits, reading blueprints, and fixing mistakes before they became disasters. That habit eventually saved my wife's life. Carol and I had been married for 38 years. We weren't wealthy, we were comfortable. Everything we owned had been earned, one project at a time. The thing we treasured most wasn't our house in Nashville. It was a lake house overlooking Barren River Lake. 11 acres, a bluff high above the water. A 4-bedroom home I built myself, mostly on weekends, after finishing 12-hour workdays. Every wall carried a memory. Every deckboard had passed through my own hands. We always planned to retire there. Someone else had different plans. His name was Derek Henderson, my son-in-law. For nearly 2 years, Derek had tried to convince me to add his name to the deed. Every conversation sounded different. The goal never changed. Sometimes he called it an investment. Sometimes it was tax planning. Sometimes he claimed he only wanted security for my daughter, Melissa. I listened politely every time. But every explanation had one thing in common. It benefited Derek far more than it benefited anyone else. The last conversation happened only 4 days before I left on my fishing trip. He and Melissa showed up at our house without calling. Carol welcomed them inside and made coffee, while Derek wandered around the kitchen, pretending to admire the renovations I'd finished the previous winter. Melissa hardly spoke. She kept staring at the floor. That alone told me something wasn't right. When everyone finally sat down, Derek leaned forward with the smile he always wore whenever he wanted something. "I've been thinking about the lake house," he said. "I think it's time we treated it like a family investment." I said nothing. He continued. "If our names were on the deed, I could use the property as collateral for a business loan." "What business?" I asked. He hesitated. "Consulting." "What kind of consulting?" He offered a vague explanation involving logistics, marketing, and online clients. The more he talked, the less convinced I became. I excused myself and walked into my office. When I returned a few minutes later, I wasn't carrying an answer. I was carrying a manila folder. I laid it on the kitchen table. Inside were copies of every financial record involving Derek over the previous 2 years. $22,000 toward a home they never purchased. $11,000 for the pickup truck parked in my driveway. $8,000 after Melissa's medical insurance disappeared. $4,000 for overdue rent. $45,000. Every payment documented. Every loan agreement signed. Not $1 ever repaid. I spread the papers across the table like blueprints. Then I looked directly at Derek. "I'm not putting your name on my property." The smile disappeared. "It's not giving it to us," he replied. "It's just security." "For who?" "For the family." I shook my head. "I've already helped this family." I've helped more than you seem willing to remember. The lake house belongs to Carol and me. It stays exactly that way. The room became very quiet. Then Derek slowly pushed back his chair. When he stood, something changed in his face. The friendly smile vanished. In its place was a look so cold, it made me realize the polite conversations had always been an act. "You know what your problem is?" he asked. I folded the folder closed. "No." "You can't stand seeing anyone else get ahead." I stood too. "My problem is that you're still standing in my kitchen." His jaw tightened. For a second, I honestly thought he might lose his temper. Instead, he forced another smile, a fake one. "We'll talk again." "No," I said. "We won't." He walked toward the front door without another word. Melissa followed behind him. Just before stepping outside, she glanced back at me. There was fear in her eyes. Not anger, not disappointment. Fear. I watched their truck disappear down the street. When I closed the front door, Carol was still standing beside the kitchen counter. "You saw it too, didn't you?" she asked quietly. I nodded. Something's different. Neither of us slept particularly well that night. 4 days later, I left for Lake Cumberland. Before climbing into my truck, I kissed Carol goodbye. "Call me when you catch the big one," she laughed. "I'll hold you to it." Thursday evening, we talked on the phone. She sounded perfectly normal. Friday morning, I texted her. She answered within minutes. "Coffee's on. Miss you already." That was the last normal message I would ever receive from my wife. Friday night, I texted again. No reply. I figured she'd gone to bed early. Saturday morning, still nothing. I called twice, straight to voicemail. By Saturday afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. It was the same feeling I'd gotten just before scaffolding collapsed on a construction site. The same feeling I'd had before a retaining wall gave way after days of heavy rain. Nothing obvious looked wrong, but somewhere beneath the surface, something had already failed. I packed my gear without finishing lunch, told my friends I needed to get home. The entire 3-hour drive back to Nashville, I couldn't shake the feeling that every mile mattered. I just didn't know why. When I finally turned onto our street late Sunday afternoon, the first thing I noticed wasn't the house. It was the newspaper, still lying in the front yard. Carol never left it there. Not ever. Then I saw her car, exactly where I'd left it. The garden hose stretched across the walkway. The tomatoes she'd been watering were beginning to droop. Nothing had moved. Nothing had changed. Except the back door was standing open. I didn't run into the house. 40 years in construction had taught me that panic makes people miss details. So I forced myself to slow down. The back door was unlocked. That alone wasn't normal. Carol locked it every evening before sunset, whether I was home or not. I stepped into the kitchen. "Carol?" My voice echoed through the empty house. No answer. The coffee mug she'd used Thursday morning still sat in the sink, a dark ring dried along the bottom. Her reading glasses rested beside an open library book on the nightstand. The bed was made. Her cell phone charger was plugged into the wall. But her phone was gone. I walked through every room. Living room, guest bedroom, bathroom, garage. Nothing looked disturbed. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry, no overturned furniture. It almost looked as though she had simply disappeared. Then I noticed the basement door. Closed. We usually kept it open during the day to help circulate the air. Something about it felt wrong. I reached for the handle. It wouldn't move. Locked. For a second, I simply stared at it. Then I remembered something that made my stomach tighten. 14 years earlier, after a burglary in our neighborhood, I had installed a deadbolt on that door. It locked from the outside with a key. During a remodel a couple of years ago, I'd removed the inside thumb-turn mechanism, planning to replace it later. I never got around to it. If someone locked that door from the outside, whoever was inside couldn't get out. My hands were shaking before I even reached for my keys. The first key missed the lock. The second slid in. I turned it. The deadbolt clicked. The moment the door opened, a wave of hot, stale air rushed up the stairs. Then came the smell. Heavy. Humid. The unmistakable odor of someone trapped in unbearable heat for far too long. I didn't walk. I ran. At the bottom of the stairs, Carol was lying against the concrete wall. Her knees were pulled toward her chest. Her clothes were covered in dust. Dark streaks marked the floor where tears had dried across the concrete. Her lips were cracked so badly, they were bleeding. For one terrifying second, I thought I was too late. Then her eyelids fluttered. She turned her head just enough to look at me. "Ray." It was barely more than a whisper. I dropped to my knees beside her. "I'm here. I'm here, sweetheart." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "My wife has been trapped in our basement for days," I said as calmly as I could. "She's conscious but severely dehydrated. I need an ambulance, immediately." The dispatcher began asking questions: age, medical history, breathing, consciousness. I answered every one without taking my eyes off Carol. While we waited, I ran to my truck, grabbed the insulated thermos I'd been using on the drive home, and returned with cold water. I remembered enough first aid to know not to let her drink too fast. I helped her take one small sip, then another. She squeezed my hand weakly. "I knew you'd come." I swallowed hard. "You don't have to talk. Just stay with me." She tried to smile. It nearly broke me. 9 minutes later, I heard sirens. 2 paramedics rushed downstairs carrying equipment. One immediately started an IV. The other checked her blood pressure and oxygen levels. They worked with the calm efficiency that only comes from seeing the worst days of people's lives. As they lifted Carol onto the stretcher, one of the paramedics looked directly at me. "We're getting her out in time." He paused. "But another day..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I already knew. At Vanderbilt University Medical Center, doctors moved quickly. Blood work, IV fluids, heart monitoring, temperature checks. I stayed beside Carol's bed while nurses came and went. Nearly an hour passed before the attending physician finally walked over. "I'm Dr. Anita Sharma." She offered a reassuring smile. "Your wife is stable." I felt my shoulders relax for the first time all day. "She was severely dehydrated," Dr. Sharma continued. "She also has heat-related stress and significant bruising on both forearms." "Bruising?" The doctor nodded. "Repeated impact injuries." As if she'd been striking something, over and over. The basement door. She'd been trying to get out. My chest tightened. After the doctor left, Carol slowly opened her eyes. I took her hand. "You don't have to tell me anything right now." She shook her head. "I need to." Her voice was still weak, but each word carried determination. Friday morning. I was downstairs, looking for canning jars. I listened without interrupting. I heard someone coming. I thought it was you. It wasn't. She closed her eyes for a moment. It was Derek. Every muscle in my body went rigid. He took my phone. He said... She stopped to catch her breath. He said the door would stay locked until you agreed to put his name on the lake house. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What? He smiled. He said you'd give in once you realized I wasn't answering your calls. Tears rolled slowly down her face. There wasn't any water. I found half a bottle of sparkling water on a storage shelf. I made it last as long as I could. I kept banging on the windows. The bars wouldn't let me out. Those bars. I'd installed them myself years ago to protect our home. Without realizing it, I'd helped build the prison that almost killed my wife. I lowered my head for a long moment. Then I looked back into Carol's eyes. I'm so sorry. She squeezed my hand with what little strength she had left. This wasn't your fault. No. I took a slow breath. It wasn't. But it is going to become Derek's biggest mistake. At that moment, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about evidence. And I already knew exactly where I was going the moment I left the hospital. I left the hospital just after sunset. Carol was finally asleep. The IV fluids had started bringing color back into her face. But the image of her lying on that concrete floor refused to leave my mind. For 38 years, she had been the steady center of my life. Someone had looked at that woman, calculated exactly how vulnerable she was, and locked her away like she didn't matter. By the time I reached our house, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger clouds judgment. I needed a clear head. Construction taught me that every collapse leaves a trail. You just have to know where to look. I walked straight to the basement. This time I wasn't there as a husband. I was there as a witness. I photographed everything. The deadbolt from every angle. The missing interior thumb turn. The staircase. The scrape marks on the concrete where Carol had dragged herself closer to the door. The steel bars covering each basement window. The half-empty bottle of sparkling water sitting on a dusty shelf. Her sweater, still lying where she'd used it as a pillow. I even photographed the dried tear stains on the concrete floor. Some people might think that sounds excessive. It isn't. Evidence disappears faster than memories. Before leaving, I checked the temperature with the digital thermometer hanging near my workbench. 91 degrees. And the sun had already started going down. I imagined what that room must have felt like at 3 o'clock Friday afternoon. Then I forced myself to stop imagining. Facts, not emotions. Facts win cases. An hour later, I walked into the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department. I need to report an attempted homicide, I told the desk officer. He looked up immediately. Within minutes, I was sitting across from Detective Sandra Pruitt. She was the kind of detective who never interrupted. She simply listened. I explained everything from the beginning. The arguments over the lake house, the money I'd loaned Derek over the years, my fishing trip, finding Carol, her statement at the hospital. Only after I finished did Detective Pruitt begin asking questions. Did Derek ever threaten you directly? Not in so many words, but after I refused to put him on the deed. He changed. How? He stopped pretending. She made a note. What about your daughter? I hesitated. I honestly don't know. She was there during the argument, but I don't know what she knew afterward. Pruitt nodded thoughtfully. We'll find out. I handed her my phone. Every photograph, every timestamp, every document. She studied each one carefully. When she reached the picture of the basement lock, she leaned closer. This lock only opens from the outside? Yes. And there's no interior release? No. I never reinstalled it after renovating. She looked up. That means whoever locked this door knew exactly what they were doing. I didn't answer. Because I already knew she was right. Detective Pruitt followed me back to the house. Crime scene technicians arrived shortly afterward. For nearly 2 hours, they photographed everything again, measured the basement, collected fingerprints from the deadbolt, bagged the water bottle, documented every bruise-sized bloodstain on the wall, where Carol had struck it with her arms while trying to attract attention. Nothing was overlooked. As they worked, Detective Pruitt asked one final question. Do any of your neighbors have security cameras? I thought for a moment. Then I remembered Mrs. Hadley, retired schoolteacher, lived behind us across the alley. She installed cameras after someone stole packages from her porch the previous Christmas. We walked over together. Mrs. Hadley answered the door wearing slippers and a faded blue robe. The moment she heard what had happened to Carol, she invited us inside without hesitation. My cameras record everything, she said. If they caught something, you're welcome to it. She opened the footage on her laptop. Friday, 9:14 a.m. A gray pickup truck appeared at the end of the alley. My stomach tightened. Derek. The timestamp continued running. 9:17. He walked through our back gate carrying nothing. 9:41. He came back out alone. Calm. No rush, no panic. He climbed into his truck and drove away, as casually as someone leaving a grocery store. The room fell silent. Mrs. Hadley looked at the screen, then at me. Oh my God. Detective Pruitt copied the footage onto an evidence drive. Then she closed the laptop. Mr. Mercer, we have enough for an arrest warrant. I returned home just before midnight. The house felt even emptier than before. Carol wasn't there to remind me to lock the doors. There wasn't a television humming in the background. Only silence. I poured myself a cup of coffee, even though I knew I wouldn't sleep. That's when I noticed my phone. 8 missed calls, all from Derek. 6 text messages. Call me when you get this. It's important. We need to talk. The final message had been sent only hours before I found Carol. He'd been trying to reach me while she was still trapped underground. The phone rang again. Derek. For several seconds, I simply stared at his name. Then I answered. His voice came fast. Too fast. Ray, thank God. I've been trying to reach you. I said nothing. It got out of hand. Still nothing. I never meant for it to last that long. His breathing became uneven. The fishing trip. I thought you'd come home Friday. I closed my eyes. He wasn't denying it. He was explaining it, like a contractor trying to justify a failed inspection. I panicked, he continued. I just wanted to scare you. I was going to let her out. You have to believe me. I finally spoke. The doctor told me another 24 hours, and my wife would have died. Silence. Derek, you locked a 61-year-old woman in a 90-degree basement. You stole her phone. You left her there. Then you drove away. I made a mistake. No. I could hear my own heartbeat. You made a decision. They're not the same thing. His voice cracked. Please don't call the police. I looked toward the basement door. They're already looking for you. Another long silence. Then he whispered, Ray, don't call me that. You stopped being family the moment you turned that key. I ended the call. He called back 4 more times. I watched every call ring until it stopped. Then I blocked his number. For the first time since I'd opened that basement door, I felt something unexpected. Not relief, not satisfaction, certainty. Because I knew exactly what happened next. Derek believed this was a fight over a piece of property. He had no idea. He had just declared war on the wrong old builder. The next morning, I stopped at the hospital before sunrise. Carol looked stronger, not healthy, not yet, but stronger than she had the night before. She managed a small smile when I walked into the room carrying flowers from the hospital gift shop. You didn't have to buy those, she said. I know. I bought them anyway. She reached for my hand. Did you sleep? A little. Did you call the police? I did more than that. I told her everything. The photographs. Detective Pruitt. Mrs. Hadley's security camera. The arrest warrant that was already being prepared. Carol listened quietly. When I finished, she nodded once. Good. There wasn't a trace of hesitation in her voice. No desire to protect Derek, no concern about family drama. Only relief that someone had finally taken control. Then she surprised me. What about Melissa? I looked down for a moment. I don't know. I honestly don't. I want to believe she had nothing to do with it. Carol sighed. So do I. But believing something doesn't make it true. At 9 o'clock that morning, I walked into the office of attorney William Cross. I'd known Bill for almost 20 years. He handled contracts for several commercial projects I'd built, and more importantly, he never wasted words. After listening without interrupting, he stood up and drew 3 columns across a whiteboard. Criminal, civil, estate. We'll let the police handle the criminal case, he said. We focus on protecting everything else. He explained that Derek could face criminal charges on his own. But Carol and I also had the right to sue for the physical and emotional damage he'd caused. Medical expenses, pain and suffering, intentional false imprisonment. Everything would be documented. Then Bill tapped the 3rd column. Estate. You need to update your will today. I hadn't expected that. He folded his arms. If a man is willing to imprison your wife over a property deed, what do you think he'll do if something happens to you? I didn't answer, because I already knew. Within an hour, new estate documents were sitting on his conference table. The changes were simple. Everything would go to Carol. If she passed before I did, the majority of my estate would be donated to charities I'd supported for years. Melissa would receive $1. Not because I hated my daughter, because I needed the law to leave no room for argument. The wording was deliberate, clear, impossible to misunderstand. When I signed the final page, Bill looked at me for several seconds. Are you sure? I thought about Carol lying on that basement floor, I've never been more certain of anything. The old will disappeared into his office shredder. I watched the paper vanish, piece by piece. It felt strangely symbolic. One chapter ending, another beginning. That afternoon, Bill's investigator delivered a preliminary report on Derek. It wasn't pretty. 3 different jobs in 6 years, each ending badly. Thousands of dollars in unpaid debts, civil judgments from another state, a failed business partnership, credit cards nearly maxed out, loans he couldn't repay. Bill slid the report toward me. You weren't his first target. You were his last option. I slowly closed the folder. Everything suddenly made sense. The pressure, the constant requests, the endless excuses. He hadn't wanted the lake house because it meant something to him. He wanted it because every other door had already slammed shut. Tuesday morning, Detective Pruitt called. "We've arrested Derek." There wasn't a trace of celebration in her voice, just professionalism. "The arraignment is Thursday. I thought you'd want to know." I appreciate the call. After hanging up, I drove back to the hospital. Carol was sitting up in bed, reading. "The police got him," I said. She closed the book quietly. "How do you feel?" I expected her to say relieved. Instead, she whispered, "Sad." I frowned. "For him?" She shook her head. "For Melissa. I don't know how she comes back from this." Neither did I. The courthouse was crowded Thursday morning. Derek entered wearing an oversized gray suit that looked borrowed. The confident man who had stood in my kitchen only a week earlier was gone. He never looked toward me. Not once. Melissa sat alone in the back row. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept since the arrest. The prosecutor presented the evidence one piece at a time. Carol's medical records, photographs of the basement, the damaged deadbolt, the temperature readings, Mrs. Hadley's security footage. On the courtroom monitor, everyone watched Derek walk into my backyard at 9:17 Friday morning, then leave 24 minutes later. Alone, calm, without looking back. His attorney argued that Derek never intended to leave Carol there for 3 days. Judge Claire Patterson barely reacted. Intent to imprison is sufficient. The duration affects sentencing. It does not erase the crime. The hearing lasted less than an hour. When it ended, Derek was ordered to stand trial. As people began filing out of the courtroom, someone quietly called my name. "Dad?" I turned. Melissa was standing a few feet away. Her eyes were red. "I need to explain." I looked at her for a long moment. "Then explain." "I didn't know he was going to leave Mom there. I swear. I thought..." Her voice broke. "I thought it was only going to be a few hours." For several seconds, I couldn't speak. She just admitted something without realizing it. "You thought he was going to lock your mother in a basement? For a few hours?" She lowered her head. I didn't think he'd actually hurt her. "No." I stepped a little closer. "Melissa, your mother almost died." Tears streamed down her face. "I know." "No." "You know that now. But while she was trapped, you never called me. You never drove to the house. You never checked on her." "I was scared." "So was your mother. She was scared for 3 days." The hallway around us had gone completely quiet. People were pretending not to listen. Every one of them was listening. Melissa reached toward me. "Dad, please." I stepped back. "I spent your entire life protecting you. I would have done anything for you. But somewhere along the way, he decided protecting him mattered more than protecting your mother." She covered her mouth and sobbed. "I made a terrible mistake." I nodded slowly. "You did?" Then I looked at her one last time. "I'm not angry anymore." Her eyes lifted, searching mine. "I'm finished." I turned and walked toward the elevator. Behind me, I heard her call my name once. Then again. I never looked back. Because some foundations crack beyond repair. And once that happens, the safest thing you can do is stop trying to rebuild on broken ground. That evening, my phone rang from a Georgia number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. Something told me not to. "Mr. Mercer?" The woman's voice sounded controlled, but only barely. "My name is Linda Henderson. Derek's mother." I leaned back in my chair without saying a word. "I know you're angry," she continued, "and I understand why. But before everyone's future is destroyed, I was hoping we could settle this as a family." I looked toward the living room window. Outside, the sun was disappearing behind the trees. Inside the hospital, Carol was finally beginning to recover. There was only one future I cared about. My wife spent 3 days locked in a basement. I said quietly, "I understand." "No," I cut her off. "You understand the words." "You don't understand what they mean." Silence. She tried again. "I'll make sure Derek pays back every dollar you've ever loaned him. This isn't about money. We'll help however we can." It stopped being about money the moment your son turned that deadbolt. Her breathing caught. "Please." "He's made terrible mistakes. A good man can still make—" "No." My voice stayed calm. "A good man doesn't leave a 61-year-old woman trapped without water. He doesn't drive away. He doesn't ignore her for 3 days." Another long silence. "I think we're finished here." Before she could answer, I ended the call. There was nothing left to discuss. The next afternoon, Bill Cross called. "They've reached out." I already knew who "they" meant. "Derek's attorney wants a settlement meeting." "What kind of settlement?" "They know they don't have assets. No savings. No real estate. No meaningful income. If the civil judgment goes to trial, you'll probably win. But you'll spend years trying to collect money that doesn't exist." I wasn't interested in chasing empty bank accounts. "What are they offering?" Bill opened the file. "A full written admission. Acceptance of liability. A permanent waiver of any claim to your estate or the lake house. A lifetime no-contact agreement. And a sworn written apology." I was quiet for several seconds. Finally, I asked, "Will it require him to admit exactly what he did?" "Every detail. No vague language. No excuses." I nodded. Set the meeting. 3 weeks later, the criminal case was supposed to begin. Instead, Derek accepted a plea agreement. The courtroom was almost full when Carol and I arrived. She was stronger now, still thinner than before, still bruised, but she insisted on being there. "I need to see it finished," she told me that morning. Judge Claire Patterson reviewed every condition carefully. Derek stood at the defense table wearing another oversized suit. He looked 10 years older than he had a month earlier. The prosecutor read the agreement aloud. Guilty to false imprisonment, supervised probation, mandatory counseling, community service, a permanent no-contact order preventing Derek from ever contacting Carol or me again. The judge looked directly at him. "Do you understand these conditions?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Are you entering this plea voluntarily?" "Yes." His voice barely carried across the courtroom. The judge signed the order. The gavel struck once. Just like that, the criminal case was over. I expected to feel satisfied. Instead, I felt strangely empty. Justice doesn't erase memories. It simply acknowledges them. 90 minutes later, we walked into a smaller courtroom for the civil settlement. This was the part that mattered most to me. Judge Carlos Mendez sat quietly while both attorneys reviewed the documents. Everything had already been negotiated. The judge simply wanted every signature entered into the public record. Bill handed me a copy. Then another was passed to Derek. I watched him read the first paragraph. His shoulders sank lower with every page. Finally, the judge instructed him to read the admission aloud. His voice trembled. "On the date in question, I deliberately imprisoned Carol Ann Mercer inside the basement of her home for the purpose of forcing Raymond Mercer to transfer ownership of his lake house against his will." The courtroom was completely silent. He continued. "I knew there was no water source, no bathroom, no means of escape, and I accept full responsibility for everything that followed." Every word echoed through the room. There was nowhere left to hide, no explanation, no excuse, only truth. The judge accepted the statement and ordered it entered into the official record. Then another document was placed before Melissa. She stared at it for several seconds, almost as though signing her name would make everything real. Eventually, she picked up the pen. Her statement was shorter. She acknowledged that Derek had told her he intended to pressure me into signing over the property. She admitted she hadn't warned me. She admitted she hadn't checked on her mother. She admitted she had done nothing. When she finished signing, she quietly pushed the document back across the table. She never looked at me. I wasn't sure she could. Outside the courtroom, Bill gathered the final paperwork into his briefcase. "That's everything," he said. "No more hearings. No more filings. No more appeals." Carol slipped her hand into mine. For several moments, we simply stood in the courthouse hallway. People hurried past us carrying stacks of files. Lawyers rushed toward elevators. Deputies escorted defendants through security doors. Life kept moving. Carol looked up at me. "Are you finished?" I thought about the photographs, the investigation, the arrest, the rewritten will, the hearings, the evidence, every careful step I'd taken since opening that basement door. For 40 years, I'd built houses one beam at a time. This had been no different. Every piece had been placed exactly where it belonged. Every loose end had been secured. I squeezed her hand gently. "Yes," she smiled for the first time in weeks. "Good. Then let's go have lunch." I laughed softly. "That's all you want?" She nodded. I've had enough courtrooms for one lifetime. As we walked toward the courthouse doors, sunlight poured through the glass entrance. For the first time since I came home from that fishing trip, it finally felt like we were walking toward something, instead of running from it. After we left the courthouse, Carol pointed toward a little diner on Charlotte Avenue. We haven't been there in months, she said. I smiled. Then let's fix that. It was the same place we'd been eating breakfast since long before Melissa was born. Same red vinyl booths, same waitress who always remembered Carol liked extra lemon with her iced tea. For the first time in weeks, no one asked us about lawyers, or court dates, or detectives. We ordered lunch like it was any other Tuesday. A turkey sandwich for Carol, meatloaf for me. When the waitress asked how our summer had been, Carol simply smiled. It's been unforgettable. The young woman laughed politely, not realizing how true that was. As we ate, we talked about ordinary things, the tomatoes in the backyard that had grown wild while Carol was in the hospital, the fishing boat that still needed a new motor, whether we should repaint the kitchen before winter. Simple conversations, the kind most people never think twice about. I found myself listening to Carol's voice more carefully than I ever had before. 3 weeks earlier, I almost lost it forever. Life slowly settled into a new routine. Carol regained her strength a little more each week. The bruises on her arms faded. The nightmares took longer. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find her sitting quietly on the edge of the bed. She never wanted to talk about them, so I never pushed. I'd simply sit beside her until she reached for my hand. Sometimes healing doesn't happen through words. Sometimes it happens because someone stays. A month later, Bill Cross called with one final update. The civil judgment has been entered. The no-contact order is permanent. Derek can't challenge the settlement. He can't come after the property. He can't contact either of you. Legally, this chapter is over. After I hung up, I walked into my office. The manila folder containing every photograph, every court filing, every police report, and every signed statement was still sitting on my desk. I opened the filing cabinet, placed the folder inside, labeled it with one word: closed. Then I locked the drawer, not because I wanted to forget, because I no longer needed to carry it every day. People sometimes ask me if I regret changing my will. The answer surprises them. No, I don't. Not because I stopped loving my daughter. A father doesn't wake up one morning and decide to stop loving his child. It doesn't work that way. I still love Melissa. I probably always will. But love and trust are not the same thing. Trust is built, and trust can be broken. What happened that weekend wasn't one bad decision. It was a series of choices. She knew Derek intended to pressure me. She knew something was going to happen while I was out of town. She never called, never checked on her mother, never warned me. Those choices carried consequences. As painful as that truth was, ignoring it would have been even worse. About 6 months after everything ended, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. I recognized Melissa's handwriting immediately. Inside was a single page. She wrote that she had filed for divorce. She had started counseling. She said she replayed those 3 days in her mind every night. She admitted that fear had made her choose the easiest path instead of the right one. Near the end of the letter, she wrote, "I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope that one day you'll believe I finally became the daughter you raised." I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it inside my desk. I didn't answer, not because I wanted to punish her, because some wounds need more time than words can heal. Maybe one day we'd talk again. Maybe we wouldn't. Life doesn't always give us clean endings. Sometimes it only gives us honest ones. The following spring, Carol and I finally drove to the lake house. The place looked exactly as we'd left it. Morning fog drifted across the water. The old wooden dock creaked beneath our feet. Birds skimmed across the lake as if nothing had ever happened. Carol slipped her arm through mine. You know, I used to think this place was the most valuable thing we owned. I looked at the house I'd built board by board nearly 3 decades earlier. I thought so too, she smiled. But it isn't. I knew exactly what she meant. The lake house wasn't what Derek had tried to steal. Not really. He thought he was fighting for property. I was fighting for the woman standing beside me, for the quiet mornings we'd earned together, for every ordinary day we still had left. Those were the things that couldn't be measured in acres or dollars. As the sun climbed higher over the water, I wrapped my arm around Carol's shoulders. We stood there without speaking, listening to the wind, listening to the lake, listening to a silence that no longer felt frightening, just peaceful. Looking back now, people often ask me what the biggest lesson was. They expect me to talk about security cameras, or better locks, or legal planning. Those things matter, but they aren't the lesson. The real lesson is much simpler. Pay attention when someone's character changes. Believe actions before promises. Protect the people you love before you protect your possessions. Because houses can be rebuilt. Money can be earned again. Even reputations can recover. But the people sitting around your dinner table tonight, they're the only treasure you'll never truly replace. Carol and I drove home that afternoon with the windows down and the radio playing softly. For the first time since I returned from that fishing trip, the road ahead finally felt longer than the road behind us. And after everything we'd survived, that was more than enough.